So I'm reading from this new book of mine, Coda, came out in the fall, and I'm just reading the first chapter. And thank you, Harry, for having us. I am reading the entirety of the first chapter, in fact. So. Seeing we are at leisure, and that I may contuse your lungs with laughter no divinity will hear, I remind you, I am nothing, I am no one, I am nowhere, a revenant innominate, and implore you call me anything your conscience and coincidence, your recognized resemblance would alloy to my good nature or unwittingly prefer. I am your humble witness, your deponent in this fracas, both eager to increase the spleen that draws your convalescence to its feral peak, its dreamless near, and to whirl another verticil of subterfuge and pretext as the forthcoming embodiment of ideal interlocutors' demands. It may appear imprudent to profane the middle margins of this withering excursus with such malign solicitude and affable defiance. The contraindication to the manifest emergence, the clarity of purpose that led you to its doorstep, but that is not your business any more than my concern. I seek no consolation in some impotent avowal or its ersatz diagnosis fixed within this harmony of negligence and disrepair. If indeed it's understood I have begun it all, and that by nothing more than this apportioning of paragraphs into such a melodious rose of a form, so be it. Each petal tolls a counterpoint unheard since first dislimned this vengeful parody of progress. Let us recall together then my life upon the main, my longing to evade the undiscovered throes of some fated ontogeny by plotting a surrender to the fleeing tide, the leeward gaze, and the subsequently ascertained mendacity of my disclosures, amidst the bleary slur of lo these many fickle thrusts and jaded parries. Indeed, the mere acceptance of my previous imposture, convening such reproof to its rhetorical avail, serves to guarantee this stipulated misadventure, without which my confession would never have acceded to the differential patter of its lyric gale. And though I know that some of you have firstly been informed of my foremost compendium of escapades and apothegms by this crude affidavit of its sanative effects, through said conjecture having been apprised of where the thrilling chronicle of its return to relevance broke off, I anticipate an interlude in my circumlocution is of so little import to your expected entree into its remitting midst, you won't give it a second thought. I surmise, that is to say, the concomitant consonants resulting from your bearing board aboard the redirected transport of this rotted husk, this leaky float, allowing that our comedy contrives a fixed reliance, a near interdependence of reciprocal directives in the dispatch of this codex of seductions and bereavements, from bottle set adrift athwart the echo of the waves to anonymous receiver on some distant shoal. Alas, I fear the reciprocity of which I speak and for which I have spoken does not speak of the same humor for us both. My mistake was in accepting we had met at some disjuncture. I have no way of knowing that you've ever deigned transgress, and yours is less mistake than the presumption of an absence, of your not having this pastiche of minutiae at the ready while we ready to embark, while we recall the launch of our generic embarkation, as if our last beginning can continue to invigorate the prospect of a first before all others, the dislocated first that compels us to the measure of all precedents and paragons to follow. In all, I fully recognize the wise and wily members of this coddled tribe, no less inclined to sidestep such professions of false promises, promises made only to retract. But that will not dissuade me. You'll note my general practice of forsaking such advice in the achievement of communion, if not precisely commutation, and I'll do no different now in adhering to my path. A path, you will agree, that started somewhere, began sometime, so the telling of the telling will decidedly elapse. Your facile schemes, your fretful chidings, why must we pretend that we have braved this run together, that our times and ways of passing time move on a standard gauge of track? We come upon our commonweal by virtue, and it's only your goodwill and genteel custom that still bind us to this shared resolve, this common gap. Why not take a stab, that is, at recapitulation, and acknowledge our proclivities as equal and not prior to their final degradation into form? The measure of the conquest I would as much coerce across the plane of this transcendence, if not compelled to practice through the censor of the corpus, the scarified remainder of an unremembered scrum. I can't account for those of you who've come upon this apologue without prior exposure to its fundamental plan, but there are reasons for my having left off in that muddle of a masterpiece, alleged to be continued by the unheard and unchallenged implications of some recondite anon, as everything resultant only musters to necessity, given your unwavering collusion. Reasons in the plural, this I won't deny, and perhaps none ranks as greater than the move towards a synopsis, a redaction of past influences. One brooks that what seemed pivotal at one point in our fellowship can flounder through the trauma of its trivialization once sufficient time has passed for those who first encountered it to vacate, then rejoin. How plainly shall I put it? Do I merely carry on? What is it to you if I should blather and perseverate or try to assess blame? You are my confidant, it's true, but penance and purgation are neither yours to grant nor mine to squander. And what I stand to reap from our familiarity is both more and less than any shout of tribute from the Isles can provide. In this one case, I feel I'm coming round to your position, or assuming it, I think it's better put. I'm taking on the affect of an outcast to my own collated predicates, a conflation of conditions that barters an alignment of incentives for a requisite resistance in inimical preponderance, tantamount to proffering the cosmos in suspension, in partisan arrangement and correlative relief. I feel that I've been with you, that I've taken on your presence, and though I know your troubles will remain wholly your own, I anticipate the ouster of these turgid liabilities from the register of my affairs will ease your tide-worn journey crossing over. But before you raise your hackles at such august claims to service, or withdraw your loath compliance, your coerced assent, permit me to assure you that I understand the problem, an obstacle I feel an obligation to surmount. That already in this archive of contortions and dilemmas, I've alluded to the tokens of another in the past, by method of a cursory remembrance of its details and a similarly speculative allusion to its faults. Another whose portrayal you may not know is extant or existed before this one, so this litany of pilfered shards and random filiations in fulfillment of said vouchers only reads as problematic for the absence of substantive, as though a jointly held bequest. Still, I know this rationale is no excuse to riddle my dear readers with complaints and commendations in which, as mere observers to the indignity of this inaugural conspectus, they hold little or no share. That the aforementioned chronicle of my distinct morphology has hardly met your notice in relinquishing this digital remainder to the scene must recognize that some of you have yet to cull our last chance of acquaintance from the transcripts and portfolios dispersed about the ambit of your cluttered close, your soiled pen, a deficit I'll try to fill before you lose your focus, intending to elude the accusations of obscurity that hound my tropes and standards no matter how I supplicate before the critic's judgment or the tideway trends. Which is not to say I'll soon indulge my appetite for disruption, a denial that performs what it foretokens to deny. I don't want to perplex, that is, my dissolute admirers as they seize the opportunity to first perplex themselves. But patience here will demonstrate the force of my conjectures, freeing the circuitous delirium of confidence from the undisclosed confinements of its doxa. In this sense, I have taken on the role of explicator, in succession liege and vassal to my unsuspecting charge. Thus you become apparent, thus you have appeared. The second, after all, will always chance at pleading singular, even after forcible enlistment to accord, and this is the compulsion I encourage you to satisfy, despite your desperation to surrender to the fold. And how might such a summary amount to an advancement? What course could it take that it might keep this gentle rivulet from damming up with mud? Do you think that it's so easy to tell tales of tales while plundering some fetid heap of tailings for a mislaid revelation? To reform these paltry details into sacrificial code? I'll do my best to carry off this venery as predator, a rarity for one who's only ever served as prey, though you alone are able to accept my throttled resources without in turn proclaiming me the quarry once again. You alone possess the clout to vacate my conviction, but first I spin a cautionary yarn you may unspool as oft you like, or disregard my detour as a ploy to win a chortle. But you do so as a danger to us both. There lived in Königsberg a cruel eccentric who would leave his house each afternoon with a block of marble balanced on his head. In stumbling upon an unsuspecting dog, would drop the stone straight down upon its tail. Unduly vexed, the beast would run about in stunned confusion, chasing and fleeing at the same time. It happened that among the casualties of this prank was a dog whose owner, a milliner by profession, loved it very much. The block dropped on the dog's tail. The dog raised a fuss. The milliner saw the trespass and defended his dog with a yardstick. With every thwack, the milliner yelled, "My pointer? Didn't you see, you vicious fool, that my dog is a pointer?" Repeating the word pointer many times. Battered and abashed, the abused abuser didn't go out for more than a month, but finally reverted to his clockwork traps, adorned with an even heavier chunk. Approaching dog after dog, he examined each one and proclaimed, "This one is a pointer. Watch out!" So every dog, whether mastiff or lapdog, poodle or terrier, immediately became a pointer, and the block never dropped again. Turnings of the sort in any diegetic artifice, already nearly spent for its enfeebling prolixity and droll recriminations, are awkward enough to be assured all those who've traced its path as witness, who've cruised this choppy runnel with such stamina and kismet, should likely go no further for the blatant insufficiency of what has come before. Accepting then its relevance on first consideration, as though a first could ever first come now, I here forsake the prospect. I won't allow that it was so, aware I've done just that by the performative assertion to the contrary. Why, you may have asked, with such a drudge as this, occasionally of keen insight, not without sense of propriety, who had real positions to communicate, resolved to do so in a shape bordering so closely on the absurd? Might not such a one, in striving with characteristic vehemence to render some pelagic scene upon the canvas, and ever thwarted in those attempts, dash a sponge full of all colors against it to find whether it might at least paint foam? Here, however, can the present auditor, with a narcotic tranquility as of over-weariness falling into sleep, find another way to pass the time while searching sight of spout on the horizon. Well does this dissembler know, if previous testimony be worth anything at all, that to innumerable readers such intrigue will not yield a favorable consummation, and that the yearning cohort drawn to browse my rants and ravings will consider this divergence during these crucial intervening years and paths and pages an uneasy disturbance to their ways of thought and digestion. So they indicate as much with an explosive borborygmus and even spoken invective. Through all of which, as with other mercies, ought they not to thank their shrewd proprietor for the pained release inspired by such folly? To one and all of you, O irritated readers, with outstretched arms and open heart, a bit of kind farewell. Have we not, in the course of mapping out our fractional eternity, traveled some length of our life's journey in sight of one another? Have we not endured together, though at times in state of quarrel? It is my belief we shoulder similar burdens under similar restraints, and that these likenesses are spread to every common form of furlough and pursuit, to pratfalls and waterfalls, shore leaves and sabbatical leaves, spa resorts and last resorts, to seizures of assets and seizures of cortex, philosophic rigor and its corresponding mortis, flailing fits and flailing fists, jumps and jaunts and counterfeit attempts at amelioration, to sea walls breaking with the rise, harbors conquered by the tides, forest hamlets melted by the forests as they burn, to flop sweats and bomb threats, bone breaks and jonesing shakes, scalpel cuts and needle ruts, excarnation, incarnation, and being born again. So it seems I have begun to set the stage anew, as you have surely noticed. And should I have accomplished such a pageant of dissemblance by alleging the commencement I have continued since to warrant, I'd most certainly have ended prior to it. Every preface thus conveyed endeavors an impossible foreboding of persistence, but finding resolution in its retrospective limits presumes to have begun before the recollection that there was a time before, must always have commenced as though in excess of its discharge into prospect, into outset, ensuring the retrenchment of what otherwise disorders its topology of predicate effects. Such pointing towards the primal past part 2 of some crude pointer seems to yet have pointed towards a nebulous beyond. A summary assemblage I claim fortitude to mention only in, as, and by my longing to maintain an otherwise excruciating savor, the immedicable immediacy of every intermediate arousal towards an imminent resolve. Permit me, then, to sublimate this obstinate avowal for something like a general inclination to proceed, finally and for the last repeat what I have formally voiced only as a mantra, the vow of ready action sputtered underneath my breath. There is a purity in the absence, an ease of thought and motion I have seemingly embraced, but I declaim the affect for your unruly tendency, hoping you might someday come to apprehend the favor or recognize the sacrifice I make by this abandon to the feint of showing forth. I think that after all I must be making a piece of cloth, not by virtue of repetition or intent, rather because I am sitting at a loom and performing the motions I associate with its use. But I am no such weaver of sails or schemes or portents. I work the carpet of causation with the delicacy of mangled stumps, beating heavy mitts upon the symmetry of its seemingly reticulate design. So the presentation of the pantomime to follow, that assembles this coherence as a doorway and a frame, is all that differentiates the second from the plural, and the exigent apostrophe of some presumed precipitate from joining the dejecta of subsidiary modes. I'll venture what I must, that is, acknowledging that merely being patterned as an argument is no evidence of proof. But I assure you that the form of my compulsion to pursuit is more than spectacle, more than given to distract, and make this same admission in order to avoid attaching guilt to our inconsequence, as though the troth of agency could stand in for requite. I'll venture what I must, I say, and neither more nor less. Thus, my ragged theorems and their paroxysmal phrasings will prove exhortative in this one way. Those who apprehend them will recognize their obsolescence and move towards the dismissal of the same. In accordance with the crease of such propitious observation and the incidental manifest to which it pertains, one supposes an imperium of knowable particulars held in shared proportion with one's purported cohort, by implicated reference to the judgment that esteems such given stimuli as real. Whereof one cannot speak as of a diacritic orifice, thereof one must entreat a novel stratagem of signs. Thus I have envisaged so much more that might have been. It's difficult to stop from listing all the indications of a world at once foretokened and impossibly delayed, disparate though they seem, but so I must, and so I will, for dread of having nothing left and leaving nothing. I shiver as I wallow in the welter where I lie, mustering my mute and indiscriminate admirers whose missing admonitions and opulence of lost replies embolden this expectancy, this lesson learned and proffered as position, then as portent, then as havoc, then as rule. Nothing is going to happen. Nothing is happening to me. Nothing is going to happen that hasn't happened already. And anyone who'll ever think to conquer such arousal has been pardoned and defeated by having thrown themselves upon the mercy of this Vedic scam. Why then here does anyone step forth? Gleaners, such as you and I, are alone enjoined to make a survey of the wreckage and fashion what remains into. Thank you.